He said it without lowering his voice. Not even a glance in my direction first. She's been forgetting things. Small things. But still. My son leaned forward in his chair, both elbows on the conference table, speaking to Dr. Harmon as though I were a houseplant someone had wheeled in for ambiance. Last month she left the stove on. She missed 2 appointments. We're worried about her being alone. I was sitting right there, 18 inches to his left, wearing the same cardigan I'd worn to his college graduation 26 years ago because I hadn't gained a pound, and I like to remember that. Dr. Harmon, a thin man with kind eyes and the cautious manner of someone trained to navigate exactly this kind of room, turned to me. "Mrs. Calloway, how are you feeling about today's conversation?" "I'm feeling like someone who drove herself here," I said, and parallel parked on the first try. My son, Daniel, exhaled through his nose. His wife, Renee, who had not said a word yet, crossed her ankles under her chair and studied her thumbnail. She'd been studying that thumbnail since we sat down. I suspected she found it more interesting than anything I might say. "Mom," Daniel's voice went soft, the way it did when he wanted something. "This isn't about attacking you. We just want to make sure you're safe." "Safe," I repeated. "Is that what this is?" He spread his hands on the table. Reasonable. Measured. He'd learned that posture from his father, who used it whenever he wanted to end a conversation without admitting it was over. "We've been doing some research. There are some really beautiful communities not too far from us. Independent living, but with support if you need it." I looked at Dr. Harmon. "Is there a medical reason for this recommendation?" He shifted in his chair. "Well, your last cognitive screening was entirely normal, Mrs. Calloway. Your blood work is excellent for your age. You're 68. Which is young," I said. "Relatively, yes." Daniel leaned back. I could feel the frustration radiating off him, hot and invisible, like a burner he hadn't turned off either. "It's not just the medical stuff, Mom. It's too big for one person. The yard alone. I hired a boy from the neighborhood for the yard. The gutters haven't been cleaned in 2 years. Neither have yours, and you have a wife." Renee's thumbnail got very interesting again. I picked up my purse from the floor, unhurried. I set it in my lap. I looked at my son. This man I had carried inside me, brought into the world on a Thursday morning in November, sat up with through chicken pox and algebra and a broken heart over a girl named Melissa Chen, and I looked at him carefully. Really looked. He wasn't cruel. That was the tragedy of it. He was efficient. He had always been efficient, even as a boy sorting his Halloween candy by type, color-coding his binders, planning his birthday parties down to the minute. He was the kind of man who optimized things. And somewhere in the last few years, I had become a thing that needed optimizing. "I'd like to see these communities you've been researching," I said. He blinked. "Really? No." I stood. "But I'd like you both to understand that this conversation isn't over. It's just moving somewhere else." I said goodbye to Dr. Harmon and walked out first. The hallway smelled of antiseptic and burnt coffee and the particular loneliness of fluorescent light. I walked slowly, not because I needed to, but because I was thinking. The drive home took 20 minutes. I didn't cry. I hadn't cried in the car since 2019, when I heard a song on the radio that Thomas and I used to dance to in the kitchen. That was a different kind of grief. This one was something colder, the kind you have to be very still to understand. My house sat at the end of Birchwood Lane, pale gray with white trim, black shutters Thomas had repainted the summer before he died. He'd done it in the August heat, shirtless, stubborn about the latter. I'd brought him lemonade and pretended not to worry. I always pretended not to worry. He always knew I was. I parked in the driveway and sat for a moment before going in. The house was not too big. It was exactly big enough for a woman who needed space for memory. Inside, I set my purse on the kitchen counter and stood at the window above the sink, looking out at the backyard. The maple Thomas had planted when Daniel was born had grown so tall its top branches now cleared the roofline. I watered it every summer. I talked to it sometimes when no one was listening. Not because I was confused, because some conversations are easier with something that doesn't talk back. I made tea. The good kind, loose leaf, in the pot with the blue pattern that had survived 3 moves and 1 very unfortunate dishwasher incident. I carried it to the dining room table, and I sat, and I thought, the stove. Yes, I had left the stove on once. I'd been on the phone with my sister in Phoenix, and I'd forgotten the kettle for 11 minutes. The smoke alarm hadn't even gone off. Daniel had been visiting, and he'd found it and turned it off and said nothing at the time. He'd filed it away. I could see that now. He'd been building a case. The appointments I'd missed were both voluntary. A book club meeting and a lunch with someone I no longer particularly liked. Neither was medical. Neither was his business. But this was how it worked, wasn't it? They collected your small moments of ordinary humanness and quietly reclassified them as evidence of decline. I pulled my notebook from the drawer by the phone, the one I used for grocery lists and phone numbers, and the occasional poem I'd never show anyone. I opened to a blank page and wrote 1 word at the top. Clarity. Then I started writing underneath it. Everything I knew. Everything I suspected. Everything I needed to verify. By the time the tea was cold, I had a list. The first call I made was to my own attorney, not the one Daniel had suggested 2 years ago when Thomas passed. Mine, Patricia Doyle, who had handled my estate planning, who had known me since we were both in our 40s and still believed we'd live forever. Her receptionist put me through in under 2 minutes. Eleanor, Patricia said. It's been a while. I need to come in, I said. This week, if possible. She heard something in my voice. She was good at that. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Tell me what's going on. I told her about the hospital meeting, the independent living communities, the stove that had been burning for 11 minutes and apparently 11 months in my son's memory. She was quiet for a moment. Has he said anything about power of attorney, healthcare proxy? Not yet, but that's where it's going. I think you're right, she said. Come in tomorrow. I hung up and crossed the first item off my list. Daniel called that evening. I let it ring and listened to his voicemail afterward. His voice was careful, practiced. Hey, Mom, I just wanted to check in. I know today was a lot. Renee and I really do just want what's best. Can we have dinner this weekend? The 3 of us? Maybe Sunday? A pause. Love you. I appreciated the pause before the love you. It suggested he was still capable of doubt. I didn't call back. Patricia's office was on the 2nd floor of a building downtown that smelled of old wood and newer ambitions. She was already standing when I walked in, the kind of woman who greeted people on their feet as a matter of principle. Her handshake was firm. Her coffee was strong. We sat at the small table by the window instead of the desk, because she said people thought more clearly without a barrier between them. I told her everything. She took notes. She asked questions specific, lawyerly, not unkind. When I finished, she sat back and looked at me over her reading glasses. Your existing will leaves everything to Daniel. The house, the investments, Thomas's pension rollover. Yes. And you haven't updated it since Thomas died? No. She nodded slowly. Eleanor, what they're doing isn't illegal. Not yet. Suggesting a living community, framing it as concern that's family dynamics. What would make it problematic is if Daniel were to move toward obtaining power of attorney by claiming incapacity, and he used a physician or assessment that was, let's say, influenced. Dr. Harmon seemed uncomfortable. Doctors often do in those situations. She set down her pen. The question is, what do you want? I thought about that. Not what I wanted to say to Daniel. Not what I wanted him to feel. What I, Eleanor Calloway, 68 years old, retired high school English teacher, widow, reader, gardener, woman who parallel parked on the first try. What did I want? I want to make sure that what I built can't be taken from me while I'm still here, I said. And I want to decide, very deliberately, where it goes when I'm not. Patricia picked up her pen again. Then, let's get to work. We talked for 2 hours. When I left, I had an appointment to return on Thursday to review new documents. I had a plan that was entirely, precisely, quietly mine. I found out about the financial arrangement on a Wednesday, by accident, the way most important things are found. I had been looking for Thomas's old insurance paperwork in the filing cabinet in the study, the tall, gray one we'd brought from the last house and always meant to replace. In the back of the second drawer, behind a folder labeled miscellaneous, his handwriting, messy and beloved, I found a folder I didn't recognize. My handwriting on the tab, my name, but I hadn't made it. Inside, printouts. Bank statements, but not mine. A savings account I hadn't opened. In a credit union 2 towns over. Monthly deposits. $1,200 a month. Going back 3 years. The account was in both Daniel's name and mine. I didn't understand at first. I sat on the study floor, which I normally would never do because of my knees, and I read the papers twice. 3 years of monthly deposits. From my checking account, an automatic transfer, small enough to miss in a month's summary, large enough to add up to nearly $44,000 over 3 years. I pulled out my reading glasses and read again. I hadn't authorized this. Or, if I had and this was the part that made my hands go still against the papers, I hadn't known what I was authorizing. Thomas had died, and there had been so much paperwork, so many signatures. Daniel had been helpful, organized, efficient. He'd sat at this same table with folders and pens and a quiet, capable sorrow that I had trusted completely. I sat on the floor for a long time. Not from weakness, from the particular weight of seeing something clearly for the first time. Then I got up, folded the papers, put them in my purse, and called Patricia Doyle. My granddaughter Lily called the next morning before I'd finished my first cup of coffee. She was 24, Daniel's daughter from his first marriage, studying landscape architecture at a university 3 hours north. She called every Sunday without fail, and occasionally on Thursdays when something had happened, good or bad, that she couldn't wait to tell. "Grandma," she said. "Hi, I wanted to check on you. You talked to your father." A pause. "He called last night. He said you'd been at the doctor's and that the conversation had been hard." "It was very clear," I said. "Hard and clear are different things." She was quiet for a moment. I could hear her moving, the sound of a door closing softly. "Are you okay?" "Really? I'm fine, Lily," Dad said. She stopped. He said, "You're having some trouble managing things." I set down my coffee cup. "When's the last time you were here?" 3 weeks ago." "You made that soup." And did I seem like someone who was having trouble managing things? Another pause. Longer. "No," she said finally. "You beat me at Scrabble by 70 points and corrected my Latin." I did. I picked up the coffee again. "I want you to know that I'm handling some things right now. Legal things. I'm not going to explain all of it. Not yet. But I want you to know I'm not confused. I'm not struggling. I'm paying attention." She exhaled. "What do you need?" "Nothing right now. Just don't take everything you hear at face value." She was quiet for a long moment. That was enough. For now, that was more than enough. The bank took longer than I expected. I sat across from a branch manager named Kevin, who was approximately 40 years old and had the preoccupied politeness of a man managing his way through a problem he hadn't anticipated that morning. He pulled up my accounts. He went quiet. "This transfer was initiated 3 years ago," he said carefully. "It looks like it was set up through online banking." Joint access. I didn't set it up, I said. He cleared his throat. Is it possible you— No, I said. It is not possible that I set up a recurring $1,200 a month transfer to an account I was unaware of and simply forgot about it for 3 years. I am 68, Kevin, not 102. He nodded slowly. I understand. More typing. Would you like to freeze the transfer while we investigate? I'd like to terminate it permanently, and I'd like printed records of every transfer made from this account for the last 4 years. He printed them. There were more than I had found in the folder. A second recurring charge, $700 a month, to what was listed as a home maintenance account. I had a lawn boy. I had a plumber I called twice a year. I did not have a home maintenance account. I folded the papers and put them in my bag beside Patricia's folder. Anything else? Kevin asked. Yes, I said. I'd like to open a new account. Individual. No joint access. No secondary signatories. He helped me do that. It took 40 minutes. When I stood to leave, he said, Mrs. Calloway, I'd recommend contacting an attorney if you haven't already. I have one, I said. A good one. He nodded, visibly relieved not to be the last line of defense. Daniel came on Saturday. I hadn't returned his calls, but I had texted back, brief, easy, home Sunday, let's reschedule. He showed up Saturday instead. I heard the car in the driveway from the kitchen and watched him walk up the path through the window above the sink. He moved the way he always did, purposeful, head slightly down, as if walking into a headwind. I opened the door before he could knock. You came early, I said. I was worried. He searched my face. You haven't been returning my calls. I've been busy. He stepped inside. I had not invited him to, but I let it pass. He looked around the hallway, the living room, the way people do when they're checking something they don't want to admit they're checking. Everything was in its place. Fresh flowers on the side table, books stacked neatly. No smoke, no clutter, no evidence of a woman losing her grip on her own life. Can we sit? He asked. We sat at the kitchen table, where I had set a pot of coffee because I had raised him and I knew he would want some. I poured. He wrapped both hands around the mug. I've been thinking about what you said at Dr. Harmon's, he started. Which part? All of it. He looked at the table. I know it felt confrontational. That wasn't my intention. I know it wasn't, I said. Your intention was to make decisions about my life in a room that felt official enough that I'd feel outnumbered. He flinched. Just slightly. That's not fair. I found the bank transfers, Daniel. The silence that followed was very different from the ones before it. He didn't deny it. I had expected a redirect, a softening, a reframe. Instead, he was quiet for too long, and in that silence I saw exactly how much he had expected never to be caught. It was for the house, he said finally. Maintenance, repairs, taxes. Dad always handled that stuff. And after he died, you weren't. I didn't want to bother you with it. You took $44,000 from my account, I said quietly. Without asking me. I handled the bills. Show me one receipt, I said. One invoice. One contractor. One repair. One expense that matches those transfers. He looked at me. He didn't speak. I've known your whole life, I said. I knew when you cheated on your geography test in 5th grade. I knew when you dented the car and told me it was the mailbox. I knew when your first marriage was ending before you told me, because I could see it in the way you held your fork at dinner. I folded my hands on the table, so please don't sit in my kitchen and tell me this was for the house. He looked down at his coffee. A long time passed. Things have been tight, he said. The practice has had a rough 2 years. Renee's firm restructured. We had the renovation, the kids' school. You should have asked me. I knew you'd say no. Yes, I said. I would have. He lifted his head. His eyes were red at the rims. For one moment, he looked exactly like the boy who had cried over his hamster when he was 8 years old, standing in the backyard with a shoebox. I had held him then. He had been so small. He was not small now. And I was not the same woman who had done all the holding. I've already spoken to my attorney, I said. I want you to understand that I'm not saying this to threaten you. I'm saying it so you know where we are. The transfers have been stopped. My accounts have been restructured. I've also begun the process of revising my will. He went very still. Mom, I haven't decided everything yet. But I want you to hear this directly from me. The current arrangement, where you inherit everything, is no longer the plan. I looked at him steadily, not as punishment, as reality. Because what I learned this week is that you were already helping yourself to what you expected to receive. And I won't fund that expectation while I'm still living in this house. He stood up abruptly, chair scraping. This is your making a decision based on one thing. One mistake. One mistake that went on for 3 years without a word. He put his hands on the back of the chair. His knuckles were white. You can't just, Lily doesn't even need it. She's 24. She doesn't know anything about money or property or... I hadn't said Lily's name. He heard his own mistake a half-second too late. I watched it register on his face. How did you know it was Lily? I asked. His jaw tightened. He said nothing. I hadn't decided anything about Lily, I said, until just now. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. He didn't put it on, just held it. He looked around the kitchen, the same look as when he'd walked in, that quiet inventory, as if he were calculating what it was worth. I hope you'll think about this more, he said. His voice was controlled now. The sorrow, if it had been sorrow, was filed away again. I hope you'll talk to someone before you make any permanent decisions. 1-9? A counselor? Dr. Harmon? Someone. I have talked to someone, I said. My attorney. She's excellent. He left without finishing his coffee. I listened to the car pull out of the driveway, and I stayed at the table without moving until the sound of his engine faded completely. Then I got up, washed both mugs, dried them, and placed them back in the cabinet. I didn't feel victorious. I felt the way you feel after you've finally said the true thing out loud, and the room doesn't collapse, and the sky doesn't change color, and you realize that the truth was survivable all along. It was only the waiting that hurt. Lily drove down the following Friday. She didn't call ahead. She knocked. I opened the door to find her on the porch with a bag of groceries, her hair in a braid that had come half undone, mud on her left boot from what I suspected was a site visit. She looked at me, and I looked at her, and she said, "Dad called again." I figured he would. She held up the groceries. "I brought stuff for that tomato soup you like. Can I come in?" We made soup together. She was a better cook than I was, which she had gotten from her mother, not from anything in my kitchen. She moved around the space without asking where things were, because she'd been moving around it since she was 6 and hadn't forgotten. She talked while she cooked about a project she was designing for a park restoration near campus, about a professor who kept mispronouncing the word deciduous, about a parking ticket she was contesting on principle rather than practicality. She didn't mention her father again until the soup was in the bowls and we were both sitting. He said, "You're not yourself," she said. "What does he think myself looks like?" She tore a piece of bread and considered it. Quieter, I think. More agreeable. She looked up. "He said you've been making decisions that suggest your judgment is impaired." "My judgment?" I said. "Is the reason this family has a house and a college fund and a headstone that says exactly what Thomas wanted it to say. My judgment has been managing itself for 68 years. It can continue to do so without outside review." Lily smiled. It was a small smile, half sad, half something else. "He doesn't actually think you're impaired," she said quietly. "He's scared." "Of what?" "Of losing the safety net." She put down the bread. "He's always known this would all be there. Your house, your money. It was always the plan. Since he was young. Grandpa used to say it too. Someday, this will all be yours, son. It's been baked in so long that I think when it started to feel uncertain, he panicked. I looked at her. That doesn't make it right. No, she agreed. It doesn't. I'm just explaining it. You're more generous to him than I am. He's my dad. She picked up her spoon. I can love him and still see what he did. We ate in silence for a while, the kind of silence that feels like an old house settling comfortable, true. I've changed some things, I said finally. She looked at me. In my estate. In the accounts. I've restructured things. I set my spoon down. I've named you as the primary beneficiary of the trust. She went very still. Not the way Daniel had this, was different, softer. The stillness of someone genuinely surprised. Grandma, I'm not doing it to punish him, I said. I want you to understand that. I'm doing it because I looked at my life this past week and I asked myself who had shown up for it, who came without needing something in exchange, who remembered what I liked and how I slept and what made me laugh. I looked at her across the table. It was you, Lily. It was always you. Her eyes filled. She pressed her lips together, and I saw her working very hard not to cry, which was so much like her father at 8 years old, standing in the backyard with that shoebox, that for a moment my chest ached. I don't want to cause more trouble, she said. You didn't cause any trouble. The trouble was already there. I'm just finally labeling the boxes correctly. She wiped her eye quickly, once, with the back of her wrist. What do you want me to do? Nothing yet. I just wanted you to hear it from me, not from a letter or a document or someone else's version of events. I picked up my spoon again. Finish your soup. It's good. She laughed, a short, surprised sound that filled the kitchen. You're kind of terrifying, you know that? I'm just a woman who pays attention, I said. Your father never thought that was worth much. She reached across the table and took my hand briefly, warm and real. I think it's worth everything. Patricia filed the revised documents on a Thursday. New will, updated trust. Lily, named as primary beneficiary, with specific protections built in account access, locked until she was 26, or demonstrated financial hardship, all overseen by Patricia and no one else. Every automatic transfer to Daniel's household accounts, and I had found there were 9 of them, all quietly begun in the 2 years after Thomas died, had been terminated the previous week. A new individual account, my name only, held what they had not yet taken. When I signed the last page, Patricia set down the notarized copy and looked at me. How are you feeling? Like someone who remembered they were still in the story, I said. She smiled. I'll be honest with you, Eleanor. In 30 years of doing this work, the cases that worry me most aren't the dramatic ones. It's the quiet ones, the slow erosions, the families that mean well right up until they don't. She stacked the papers. What you did this week took clarity. It took being underestimated one too many times, I said. That tends to clarify things. The drive home was peaceful, in a way drives rarely are. The trees were beginning to turn at the edges, that first warning flush of orange before autumn really commits. I drove slowly and let myself notice it. Daniel had not come back. He had not written. Renee had sent one text, a carefully constructed paragraph that used the phrase, "We hope you understand. We come from a place of love," twice in 4 sentences. I had read it once and set the phone face down. Lily had texted that morning, "Tomato soup season is officially my favorite season because of you. Also, bought new boots. No mud. I had sent back a single heart." That evening, I sat on the back porch as the light faded. The maple stood enormous and steady at the far end of the yard, the way it had for 27 years. A neighbor's dog barked twice and went quiet. Somewhere down the block, a child was being called in for dinner. that specific rising, falling sound of a parent's voice at dusk that means the day is almost done. I was not done. That was the thing I had learned this week, not from any lawyer or document or confrontation at a kitchen table, but from sitting with myself long enough to ask the question. I had spent the years since Thomas died getting smaller, I thought, moving through the house more quietly, accepting more, pushing back less. Not because I was declining, but because grief had made me patient in a way that sometimes looked like surrender. I was not surrendering anymore. I went inside and took the good stationery from the desk drawer, the cream-colored kind with the slight texture, the kind I'd bought in Paris in 1997 and still had half a box of, because I saved it for letters that mattered. I sat at the dining room table. I wrote to Lily. Not about the trust, not about the legal machinery I had set in motion, just about her. About the time she was 9 and had found a broken bird in my backyard and named it Gerald and nursed it in a shoebox for 2 weeks before it died, and how she'd cried and then said, "We gave it 2 extra weeks, Grandma." That's not nothing. About how I had thought about that sentence more times than she would ever know. About how the grace of a person is visible early if you watch for it. And I had been watching. I didn't tell her the letter was important. She would know. She paid attention. I sealed it. I wrote her name on the front in my old Palmer cursive. I set it on the hall table beside the little wooden dish where I kept my keys, and I decided I'd give it to her in person the next time she came, which I expected would be before too long. The house was quiet, not empty. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for permission. Not for recognition, not for someone to finally see me clearly and make room. I had made my own room. I intended to live in it for a good long while. The maple moved in the evening wind. I watched it from the window above the sink, hands around a warm mug, the kitchen light on behind me. And I thought about how many times Thomas had stood in this exact spot and looked at this exact tree and felt, I imagined, something like this. Not happiness exactly. Solidity. The sense of being exactly where you chose to be. I kept the light on a little longer than usual. There was no reason to hurry the dark.